What can I say about Elemental Gimmick Gear that hasn't already been said? Well, pretty much anything. This game is so obscure it makes my Wonderswan blush, and that's really unfortunate, because if you crack open this game's shell, you'll find... Nope, stop, I won't do it. I won't start this video with a cheesy pun. Let's just get on with the review. Let me start by stating the obvious. Elemental Gimmick Gear, or E.G.G, if you like silly acronyms, doesn't look like a Dreamcast game. The Sega Dreamcast was a 128-bit 3D powerhouse. It was a console for blisteringly fast hedgehogs, the first home console MMO, and the technological masterpiece that was Shenmue. Next to those titles, E.G.G looks like a relic, a game trapped in the wrong generation, and it basically is. You see, E.G.G started its life as a Saturn game where its beautiful hand-drawn world would have fit right in. But in the late 90s, anything sprite-based was deemed inferior, and so sadly this game went unnoticed and unloved, never even achieving cult classic status. The story in Elemental Gimmick Gear is kinda hard to explain. Now mind you, there's nothing overly complex about it. Essentially, explorers discover a strange machine while excavating an ancient ruin. Upon further inspection, they discover that this egg-shaped mech contains a sleeping man, who they naturally begin to refer to as the Sleeper. Scientists try unsuccessfully to wake the man, but in the meantime, his machine is studied and copies are produced for use as vehicles and weapons. If you're thinking this story sounds a little Panzer Dragoon-esque, you're not alone. Anyway, the dormant ruin called Fogna suddenly springs to life and lays waste to the land with massive tentacles. Suddenly, the Sleeper, who becomes known as Leon, awakens and your mission to save the land begins. So again, this is pretty standard stuff, but there's a problem. The translation in this game is abysmal. We're not talking small grammatical errors, the sentence structure is completely bizarre at times. I found myself rereading lines 2 or 3 times in a futile attempt to divine its meaning. For example, townspeople just randomly started talking about the breeding. Throughout the entire game I never figured out what exactly that was, but it was referenced multiple times. Luckily this is not the kind of game that lives or dies by its storytelling, but I'm genuinely shocked that this was released to retail with such an incomprehensible script. Story aside, this game is just stunning to look at. The environments are lovingly hand-drawn and every inch of the game's world is unique. In other games you'll often see the same tree or same rock repeated ad nauseum. By contrast, E.G.G's world is like a giant painting. Think of it like a top-down Resident Evil. Your character traverses a static background instead of a screen of repeating sprites. The player character and NPCs are all 2D sprites that animate well, but there's nothing particularly amazing about their presentation. Their movements are not as fluid as, say, a stall, but it's more than adequate and their designs are very attractive. Looking at reviews from the time, it's a little sad how this game was treated. The desire for 3D was so intense at the time that E.G.G's 2D presentation was regarded as last gen. In 2017, however, this game would fit in well alongside two-dimensional indie darlings like Braid and Bastion. The gameplay in Elemental Gimmick Gear is frequently compared to The Legend of Zelda, and that's not without merit. The perspective and general progression from overworld to dungeon and back is the same. Your character also levels up with new abilities throughout the game, just like Link. However, the more fitting comparison is Sega's own Oasis series, also known as Story of Thor in some regions. This series, which includes Beyond Oasis on the Genesis and Legend of Oasis for the Saturn, features a comparably slow protagonist and an open-ended game world. In Elemental Gimmick Gear, it feels like the game actually goes out of its way to not inform the player of the next step, assuming instead that the player will find their own way using whatever ability they just unlocked. Now, I absolutely hate hand-holding and the overuse of tutorial in modern games, but E.G.G could probably have benefited from a little more direction. On a few instances I did have to reference a walkthrough because I simply had no idea where the next plot point was. It's possible that the poor translation contributes to this problem, but I can't be sure. Controls feel a bit loose, but otherwise very good. Leon has probably one of the puniest punches in all of video gaming. Seriously, it's almost cute. In order to connect with enemies, Leon has to position himself right next to them. But throughout your journey, new, more effective attacks do become available. The most important of these is the ability to spin. By pressing the B button, Leon's gear will retract its arms and legs and transform into, you guessed it, egg form. Holding B causes the gear to spin. While spinning, enemies can be damaged simply by crashing into them. Be warned, however, because spinning actually causes your health to slowly deplete. This ability is also used for solving puzzles and traveling through pipes. Control while spinning is appropriately chaotic, and it's very easy to unintentionally fall off ledges or platforms. A hookshot and elemental attacks are also unlocked throughout the game. All of these attacks form a pretty impressive repertoire. It's quite well balanced, and I never found myself relying on one particular attack over the others. Developer Birthday apparently realized how difficult selling a 100% 2D game on the Sega Dreamcast would be, so to counteract that, they added fully 3D boss battles. Let me be clear here, E.G.G. is a 2D game and general combat is fought in 2D, but when confronting any boss, the game switches to a 3D battle system that almost perfectly adapts the 2D moveset. In my experience, when developers try to shoehorn 3D into their games, it usually ends badly. But these boss battles actually feel great. This is an early Dreamcast title, but the 3D engine runs at an extremely fluid 60 frames per second. The boss battles are very tough, but for the most part fair, with the notable exception of a teleporting boss named Tantarm who can go straight to hell. The 3D is more than just window dressing and really does add to the battle system in a meaningful way, but I will say the camera did let me down a few times. Elemental Gimmick Gear also features a number of mini-games. These vary from trivia and high score trials to races. The races are interesting because they actually utilize the game's 3D engine. There are only 3 courses, but they each have a unique environment and are pretty challenging. You'll have to master all 3 in order to receive a very helpful item for the main game. While the races are pretty fun, I don't like it when games force you to play mini-games to unlock important items. Now this point cannot be emphasized enough. Elemental Gimmick Gear is a hard game, and I mean really hard. The game doesn't keep tally of the amount of times you die, but I'd be really interested to know. In my 17-hour playthrough, I had to have died well over 100 times, but I want to be very clear here. There's a big difference between a hard game like, say, Echo the Dolphin, and an unfair, frustrating game. At least for me, Elemental Gimmick Gear is the former, the only exceptions being the previously mentioned Tantarm fight and some timed puzzles that require almost perfect precision. I was particularly impressed with this game's checkpoint system. Sure, I died a lot, but the game respawns you in the same room that you died in. That wasn't terribly common back in 1999, and it really lessened the blow from dying for the 4th or 5th time in the same area. Difficulty is a very subjective thing, and people have different tolerance levels, but if you're fine with the difficulty of the 8 and 16-bit era, you'll probably be okay with this game. In the end, Elemental Gimmick Gear is a perfect study of the importance of timing and marketing. Simply put, this game came out a few years too late at a time when gamers weren't interested in a 2D adventure game. On top of that, the low-key release in North America basically guaranteed its obscurity. And that's too bad, because Elemental Gimmick Gear deserves more. No, it doesn't do anything particularly revolutionary, and the difficulty will definitely put off a lot of gamers, but there was a lot of heart put into this game. The audio is great, the gameplay is fun, and the artwork is beautiful and timeless. So much detail was put into every inch of the game world. I would love to see this game in high definition, though I'm sure that will never happen. Elemental Gimmick Gear will likely remain a forgotten gem of the Dreamcast's incredible game library. Thanks for watching my review of Elemental Gimmick Gear. Be sure to like and subscribe, and check back later for more Dreamcast reviews.